back again for the second week in lineup to our Women, Trauma and Mental Health Conference. I'm Tracy Jarvis, the director of PESI UK, and I'm delighted today that we've got Dr. Janina Fisher and my awesome co-host of the event, Dr. Eboni Webb, that are joining us today. And we are just going to be looking at some really important questions that have been coming up in the lineup to our event next week, and really questions that people are asking us from all over the world. So, Eboni, do you want to go ahead and perhaps just start with asking Janina that question that has come in?
Yes, yes. So again, what an honor, Janina, to have you with us today. I got your book right here because I use it all of the time. And yeah,
Oh,
we had this really powerful question come up. And I'd love for us to even just kind of, in light of this question, have you expand beyond it to what you have seen, right, over the decades of your work, right? And so we have this question about in Africa, many women prefer suffering and silence. And what can we do in such difficult contexts? And what a big question. So, really, through the lens of what you have seen, how might you answer this question?
What I immediately think is that there are so many cultures in which, probably more cultures than not, in which women are expected to suffer in silence. I'm thinking of Islamic cultures, even in the UK, where there are so many different cultures. I'm hard pressed to think about, is there any culture that encourages women to give voice to their suffering? Can you think of any? I can't think of a single culture
No.
that encourages women to express themselves.
Yeah, and not without punishment, right? So there are
Right.
names and descriptors for women who are vocal, right? And historically, I think we all can agree that it has cost women to speak out. It opens the door for other women to come through, but it always costs the woman who comes out of that silent suffering. And so I think that's the hard part, is that across the globe, this is an issue for marginalization. Within marginalization is to silence, right? Silence those who are being victimized by a larger system. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, and I'm sure you'd agree, that if you are a woman and from a marginalized group, that's
Mm-hmm.
a double whammy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
there are all these layers of marginalization,
Mm-hmm.
right? If
Mm-hmm.
if you are poor and you're a woman and you're a member of a marginalized group,
That's right.
you are even more silenced.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and I think it's a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
I remember back in the 90s, 80s and 90s, with the dawning of the women's movement,
Mm-hmm.
women got much more vocal, but I'd say probably in first world countries,
Mm-hmm.
women got much more vocal.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't say that I can't say that there's been lasting change
Mm-hmm.
as a result. Other than that, the trauma field really owes a debt to women because it was the understanding that rape, domestic violence, and child abuse were rampant,
Mm-hmm.
that really led to the development of the trauma field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
I
but I
want.
feel
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel as if we have to work with we have to work with the therapists and healers in in these countries,
Mm-hmm.
because our ways of encouraging people to use their voices may or may not be culturally comfortable,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So I think there's many layers to it. We have to empower the healers in each culture
Mm-hmm.
to to at least create safe spaces, private spaces in which women can speak out.
Yes. And I think this is one of your tremendous gifts, is to really promote the concept and the need. I don't even know if I want to even call it a technique, because I think it's just a path of healing, right? Of felt safety. And what I'm hearing you say is, within that sense of felt safety, it really has to be cultivated through the cultural lens of where it's showing up, right? And that we do need to empower and train healers within each respective culture to create that felt safety.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And in countries where it's dangerous for women to, for instance, disclose abuse,
Mm-hmm.
then we have to somehow create group settings in which there is enough safety and confidentiality
Mm-hmm.
that it becomes possible. And then I think something like this kind of conference, this kind of summit, can
Mm-hmm.
make a huge difference, hopefully too.
Agreed.
Because I was impressed that this is not just a clinical conference, it's really trying to address a global problem.
Yes.
Absolutely. And, you guys have been talking about sort of, really at the macro level, in terms of what happening in society across the globe, different countries. And Janina, you're such an expert. You've seen thousands of people across your years in the field. And if we just bring that to sort of the micro level, and us as therapists working kind of below the headlines, have you seen kind of trauma and mental health treatment change in the time that you've been working across the generations? Are we at the forefront? Are we leaving things out? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if I'm talking about the trauma field, which again I see as having largely developed out of the women's movement, the trauma field has really, I think, revolutionized mental health treatment, but it hasn't specifically addressed issues around women. And when I was preparing my presentation for the summit, I was really struck by the fact that women are still tend to be more pathologized than men, right? Women may use mental health services at a higher rate, but they're also more pathologized. Right? 75% of clients with a borderline personality diagnosis are women.
That's
You
right.
can't get more stigmatized than that.
And it's not just in borderline. Like if we look to my research, and actually one of the reasons why I founded the conference doing my neuroscience masters, is that when we look to sign at kind of the statistics behind PTSD, anxiety, depression, other disorders in the DSM-5 or ICD, it's higher. Majority of the disorders, the pathologizing is higher in women, not all, than men. So we've got a real kind of issue here. And I think the issue isn't in the symptoms, because, Janina, as you rightly say in your work, these symptoms are normal. If people have been raped, if they've been beaten, if they've been whatever they've been through, that's just what happens as us being, animals and mammals. Do you want to say a little bit more around maybe that kind of non-pathology outlook, as women have suffered immense adversity over the years?
Oh, absolutely. I think the difficulty is, how do we change the institutions that govern things like diagnostic codes and how they may be biased? I think it's crucially important that we draw attention to racial trauma, because if we think of racism as just unpleasant, we're missing a very, very important aspect, which is that we have a huge percentage of our population that is being racially traumatized every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we have to remember that trauma is not just an event. It can be an environment.
Mm-hmm.
And we get there, that if we're thinking about war, we get that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If
Yes.
UK were under attack, right, or the US were under attack, we'd get, okay, everybody's traumatized, everybody's afraid. But we don't get that our BIPOC citizens are under potential attack every day.
Mm-hmm.
So that's racial traumatization,
Mm-hmm.
not just bias. And so I feel like that's one of the big issues that affects women that we have to address.
Yes. And I think to your point as well, to even Tracy's point about that leaning into the micro, is that I've heard many discussions in the States about, race is a construct, and therefore, let's, move on from this construct. It's not real. Literally have heard that. Now, of course, these are not conversations hearing from the BIPOC community, but still the discussion about it. And it's like, well, money is a construct, and yet we absolutely embrace the reality of it, right? And so I think it's always important, and I think this is the thing we're fighting here, even diagnostically, say if we're talking about complex PTSD, it's like there's a problem then with the perception of trauma versus the objective experience like war. And so there it is that again, it's like it's a double-edged sword to come in and be disqualified simply because of a subjective experience. But we all know here that the brain doesn't organize trauma that way. Right. And I certainly, as a member of the BIPOC community, do not have the luxury of just throwing off the construct. Right. And it impacts our mental wellness, right? Our sense of safety in this world. And so I'm curious, Gina, what do you feel has been the ongoing price tag of this debate not having, I would say, a more diversified presence?
Mm-hmm. I think it's like, to me, what's happening is that a large number of people who desperately need our help are slipping through the cracks.
Yes.
Because, you can come from a culture in which you're silenced, and that's bad enough. Or you can come from a culture where you're either invisible or seen negatively.
Mm-hmm.
And that discourages
Mm-hmm.
anyone from seeking treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's really great that you're addressing the issue, the social and cultural issues, because it means that we have to educate the white therapists, the privileged therapists,
Mm-hmm.
to actually understand the real lived experience
Yes.
of BIPOC clients,
Mm-hmm.
not just the construct, the lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have to understand that in other cultures and countries, we can't, as the U.S. loves to do, we can't rush in
Right.
with 100,000,
Mm-hmm.
U.S. or U.K. therapists and save the day.
Mm-hmm.
We have to work with the lived experience in that culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I do remember a conversation I had with you, and I wanted to bring this up again because I think you highlighted this so important, because we're talking about women trauma and mental health and the fragmentation that occurs across the board. There are still professionals, still healers who discount say DID, right? Or that kind of fragmentation from trauma. Very difficult for clients to then, what the support that they desperately need if they have clinicians who don't even believe that it exists, right? That this is not real. And so, how do you lean into those conversations with clinicians who may discount this?
Well, it's very hard, and just the word dissociation is discounted, so it's a little hard to have a deeper conversation.
Yeah.
When even the word dissociation is understood as something we wouldn't want to talk about. So I think what I've found is that this idea that I've been writing about, that we think of it as fragmentation, since dissociation's a bad word. Let's not use that word. let's talk about splitting or fragmenting. And I find that this structural dissociation theory is very persuasive because it's neuroscience based. And so it doesn't feel woo-woo. I think the idea of multiple personalities is still too woo-woo for a lot of people. I can understand that. But this idea of that people get fragmented under stress in order to survive, that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I'm so grateful. Yes, for your contribution to this, because the BIPOC community gets this. What we've had to do to sit in situations, we certainly, have even kind of code switching, which I don't see any different thing is fragmentation, because our ancestors trained us to do that in order to keep us safe. Right. And so we get it. And so I'm so grateful for your contribution to even whatever word is a problem. Let's take that out so that we can get a word that actually disseminates this to the communities that need this. Yes.
Right. Yes. It doesn't matter what we call it as long as people understand it.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah.
Janina, you're going to be talking on the Women's Conference about, I'll put it in commas, sort of borderline as a diagnosis. Many women with the diagnosis, maybe incorrectly diagnosed. Do you want to just give us, we've got a couple minutes left, maybe just two little key headlines of what people can look forward to as we join you next week? To listen to your presentation.
So, this, I have not believed in borderline personality disorder in many years. I was in training with Judith Herman back in the early 90s, who taught, one of the pioneers in the trauma field. And she taught us that borderline personality disorder was not a personality disorder. It was an Axis 1 trauma-related disorder. And we were sort of forbidden to think of it as a personality disorder. And it turns out that it's much easier to treat borderline personality disorder as a trauma-related disorder. And of late, my sort of next mission in this journey that I'm on is to question the stereotypes and the isms with which we look at borderline personality disorder, and see if I can make a change in people's thinking. And in a way, your summit provided the ideal opportunity, because it is a diagnosis given to women at 3 times the rate of men.
Janina, I'm speaking on behalf of Eboni, and I don't mean to, Eboni. Can't wait to hear your presentation and yours as well, Eboni, coming up next week. So just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us on Facebook and Instagram Live, and to thank you, Janine and Eboni, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Such a
So
pleasure.
So
I love
grateful for
hanging
you.
out with you guys.
We
And I'm
love it too.
Yes, we can do this all day, but then we can't.
There's a lot of hanging out that's going to take place in the next week.
Yes. Mhm.
There is. All right. Well, bye from us. Thank you so much.
Okay.